The night they finally realized the killer had been living next door, the truth felt colder than the bodies themselves. For years he had smiled over the fence, waved politely in the mornings, and helped carry groceries without anyone suspecting that behind those familiar eyes was a darkness capable of murder. The most terrifying part was not how brutal the crime had been, but how close evil had lived to home, hiding in plain sight, undetected for so long. This is a true crime story where silence was the killer's greatest weapon, and trust became the deadliest mistake. Welcome to Dark Case Files. It was the kind of neighborhood real estate agents love to advertise. Quiet streets, neatly trimmed lawns, porch lights glowing warmly at night, and the comforting illusion that nothing truly bad could happen here. Brookside Lane sat just outside a modest suburban town, far from the chaos of big cities. Far from fear, or so the residents believed. Families had lived there for decades. Children rode bicycles until sunset, doors were left unlocked. And neighbors knew each other by name. At least they thought they did. The victim, Sarah Mitchell, was 34 years old. She worked as a community outreach coordinator at a local nonprofit, someone described by colleagues as endlessly kind and deeply empathetic. She lived alone in a small blue house at the corner of Brookside Lane, directly beside a slightly larger white house, owned by a man named Daniel Hargrave. Sarah had moved in 3 years earlier, fresh from a difficult breakup, hoping a quieter life would help her heal. Daniel had welcomed her with a plate of homemade cookies. According to witnesses, he seemed friendly but reserved, the kind of neighbor you trusted because he never crossed boundaries. Daniel was 42, single, and worked from home as a freelance IT consultant. He paid his bills on time, never had loud parties, and rarely had visitors. To everyone else, he was invisible in the best possible way. The town itself had little experience with violent crime. The local police department mostly handled minor thefts, domestic disputes, and the occasional drunk driving arrest. Murders belonged to other places, other cities, and other lives. Until the morning of October 17, 2016, when Sarah Mitchell failed to show up for work. At first, her coworkers weren't alarmed. Sarah was punctual but had taken a sick day once or twice before. However, when her phone went straight to voicemail all day and she missed an afternoon meeting she had personally scheduled, concern grew. That evening, her closest friend Emily Carter drove to Sarah's house. The porch light was off. The curtains were closed. Emily knocked. No answer. She tried calling again, listening to the phone ring faintly from inside the house. That's when fear set in. Emily noticed something off about the front door. It wasn't forced open, but it wasn't fully closed either, just slightly ajar. She called the police. When officers arrived and stepped inside, they immediately knew this was not a missing person case. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. There were no signs of a struggle in the living room, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. But in the bedroom, they found Sarah Mitchell lying lifeless on the floor. She had been strangled. There were no defensive wounds. No fingerprints that clearly stood out. No weapon. Just bruises around her neck and a look frozen on her face that investigators would later describe as shock rather than fear. It was as if she hadn't seen death coming. The medical examiner estimated she had been dead for less than 24 hours. That meant her killer could be anywhere. Maybe even watching from behind a window across the street. The investigation began under a cloud of disbelief. The town gathered in shock as news spread that a murder had occurred in their safe, quiet neighborhood. Police started with the obvious questions. Who would want Sarah dead? Friends and coworkers were interviewed. Her ex-boyfriend was quickly located and questioned. He had an alibi and lived 2 hours away. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting Sarah knew her killer or felt comfortable letting them inside. Detectives searched her phone, her emails, and her social media accounts. Nothing pointed to threats or danger. No recent arguments. No suspicious messages. At first, the idea of a random intruder was considered, but dismissed. Everything inside the house was neat. Valuables were untouched. Sarah's wallet, phone, and laptop were exactly where they should have been. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was personal. But personal from whom? Neighbors were interviewed one by one. They recalled seeing Sarah the night before, returning home around 7 p.m. She waved to a couple walking their dog. Another neighbor remembered seeing her porch light turn on around 8. No one heard screams. No one heard a struggle. That fact unsettled investigators deeply. Strangulation is not a silent crime. It takes time. It takes proximity. And yet, Brookside Lane slept through it. Daniel Hargreave was interviewed like everyone else. He told detectives he had been working late into the night. His computer logs confirmed activity. He remembered seeing Sarah come home earlier that evening. They exchanged a brief greeting. That was all. He seemed calm, cooperative, and appropriately disturbed by the news. Detectives noted nothing unusual. In fact, Daniel even offered to help by sharing security footage from a camera mounted on his garage. The footage showed Sarah walking into her home. No one followed her. No one approached afterward. It was another dead end. Weeks turned into months. The case stalled. Media attention faded. Without new evidence, Sarah Mitchell's murder became another cold case, filed away but never forgotten. Her family pushed for answers, but the police had little to give them. The town tried to move on, but the illusion of safety had shattered. People locked doors now. Porch lights stayed on. Neighbors waved less and watched more. Daniel continued to live next door. The same quiet man, mowing his lawn, taking out his trash, blending seamlessly into the background. 2 years later, everything changed because of a crime no one thought was connected. In a nearby town, 20 miles away, a young woman named Rachel Owens was found dead in her apartment. The cause of death was strangulation. Like Sarah, there were no signs of forced entry, no theft, no clear suspect. This time, however, there were faint marks on her wrists, suggesting she had been restrained. Detectives noticed eerie similarities between the two cases: the method, the victim profile. Single women living alone. Investigators from both towns began sharing information. A pattern was emerging, slow and unsettling. Over the next 18 months, 2 more women were murdered in similar circumstances. Different neighborhoods, same quiet entry, same method of killing. The media began whispering a term no one wanted to hear: serial killer. Pressure mounted. State investigators joined the case, bringing fresh eyes and modern techniques. Old evidence was re-examined. New technology was applied to trace DNA fragments once thought useless. In Sarah Mitchell's case, analysts discovered a minuscule trace of skin cells beneath her fingernails. At the time of the original investigation, it had been considered contamination. Now it was reprocessed. The DNA profile didn't match anyone in the national database, but it existed. And it was consistent across 2 of the other victims. Finally, they knew the murders were connected. The question remained: who was he? The breakthrough came from an unexpected angle. In the 4th victim's case, a neighbor reported seeing a man leaving the apartment complex late at night. He wasn't running, he wasn't panicked. He was calm, familiar, like he belonged there. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station caught the man clearly. When detectives froze the frame, the room went silent. One investigator recognized him instantly: Daniel Hargreave, the quiet neighbor, the friendly man next door. The killer had been living beside Sarah the entire time. Investigators moved quickly, fearful he might strike again if alerted. They obtained a search warrant for Daniel's home. What they found inside shattered any remaining doubts. Hidden behind a false wall in his basement were personal items belonging to all 4 victims: jewelry, phones, a scarf identified as Sarah's. There were meticulous notes detailing dates, times, and observations. Daniel had been watching for years, studying routines, learning habits. He didn't break in. He was invited in. His demeanor disarmed his victims. They trusted him. Especially Sarah, who had lived beside him. The man she saw almost every day was the same man who ended her life. During interrogation, Daniel initially denied everything. But when confronted with the evidence, he broke. His confession was chilling in its calmness. He described his actions without emotion, as if recounting routine errands. He admitted that Sarah had been his first. He said it was easy. She trusted him. She let him inside. The trial that followed transfixed the nation. Prosecutors laid out the timeline, the evidence, and the horrifying reality that a serial killer had gone unnoticed for years because he looked normal. Neighbors testified through tears, haunted by memories of shared barbecues and casual conversations. Sarah's family listened as Daniel was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Justice was served, but peace was elusive. Even today, Brookside Lane feels different. People remember. They wonder how they missed the signs. How someone so close could be capable of such darkness. This true crime story remains a grim reminder that monsters do not always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they live next door. This has been a Dark Case Files presentation. What would you have done if the killer lived beside you all along? Could you have seen the signs? Or would you have trusted the smile behind the fence? If you want more deep, unsettling true crime stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Dark Case Files and join us as we uncover the darkest truths hiding in plain sight.